Hi, thank you for coming. So my question kind of stems from your claim earlier that, especially pertaining to race, that we're all on a level playing field. I'm an economics major here, and so my question comes from my experiences here in our pretty conservative economics department, which I love being a part of. So you said that, it's how, and probably relating to how we're a capitalist society, but some will fall by the wayside, some will succeed, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't pertain to race, it doesn't pertain to anything. And I think that your claim that it's inherently racist to take anyone's race into account, I think that might be true in an ideal.
Above values.
Yeah, above values. I think that might be true in an ideal that we might shoot for, but I'm just not totally sure we're there yet. And I think the most important example for me, especially because markets are a really important thing, is that access to credit was very limited based on race until through the 1980s.
You're talking redlining.
I'm talking about redlining. I'm also talking about redlining specifically, but in other instances. So access to credit, one of the most important things to building up wealth and attaining wealth. So if that was predicated on race, and there's only been about a generation between that, so what's this level playing field? Because
the level playing field now is if you're born now, you're an individual born now, right? You're our age, right? I'm 32. You're 32 or younger, right? So you're somebody who grew up really. I was 6 when the 80s ended, right? So you grew up in the 90s, 2000s. What decisions do you make that are being impacted significantly by race? What I mean by that is when you go to apply for a credit card, if you have good credit, you are going to get a credit card. If you have bad credit, you are not going to get a good credit card. The question is and then the question becomes, okay, so let's say, for example, let's take your entire premise. Let's take your premise that their parents were poor, so they're more likely to be poor, and they're more likely to have bad credit, although credit is really a reflection of the decisions that you make, you don't inherit your parents' credit. So it's really about the decisions that you make, right? So, but let's even assume the false premise that you inherit your parents' credit for some reason, that you were impacted by all of this. The problem is that the federal government then, instead of evening the playing field by saying, okay, we're going to get out of this completely, instead what the federal government does is they go overboard to the other side. So they favor race above values again the other way. What they say is, okay, now we're going to grant subprime mortgage loans, for example, to people who are undeserving buyers, right, who don't have proper credit ratings. And that, of course, results in a subprime meltdown when it turns out that people with subprime credit ratings tend to default more often. Right, so the answer is that there's never an answer better than make the rules even for everyone. And the left, their solution to institutional racism, after shouting institutional racism, is always more institutional racism. It's always some sort of institutional measure designed to benefit one group above another, and it ends up being counterproductive. So that's my problem. I'm not going to look. Is there a history of racism in America? Of course. If you want to talk about actual institutional racism, Jim Crow was actual institutional racism, obviously. Right? And there are institutions that were racist for literally 200 years in America. But that doesn't mean that right now, if you're going to talk about institutional racism, you have to talk to me, number one, about how racism impacts the individual now, and then what is the measure that you have for fixing that? And I don't hear that ever. I just hear somebody's poor, it must be institutional racism. So it's not practical, in other words.